Disclaimer: this story is a work of creative writing inspired by the title. I was shocked by what happened during the massage based on a true story. While it may draw on real-life experiences for emotional impact, all names, places, and specific details are fictionalized for privacy and storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals is purely coincidental. The aim of this narrative is to create an engaging, emotional reading experience, not to accuse or harm any person, group, or establishment. It was a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of day that slipped by without much thought. The sun filtered softly through the blinds in my office, casting warm stripes on my desk as I stared at my computer screen. My shoulders ached from hunching over for hours, my neck felt stiff, and my mind was buzzing with deadlines. I had been telling myself for weeks that I needed a break, just 1 hour to switch off and let someone else take care of me for a change. So, I did what anyone in my situation might do. I booked a massage. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a small spa tucked between a florist and a bookstore downtown. I'd been there a couple of times before. The therapists were polite, the place smelled like lavender, and the soft background music always seemed to melt my stress away. As I walked in, the air was cool and fragrant, a gentle blend of sandalwood and eucalyptus. A young receptionist greeted me with a smile, handing me the standard form to fill out. I barely glanced at it, my mind was already halfway into the massage room, imagining the tension leaving my body. "Your therapist will be with you shortly," she said, her voice low and calming. I followed her to the familiar treatment room, dim lighting, plush sheets, and that faint trickle of water from a hidden fountain. I slipped out of my shoes, hung my jacket on the hook, and lay down on the table, letting my breathing slow. Everything felt normal, predictable, safe. That's the thing about moments that change you. They rarely announce themselves. They creep in quietly, disguised as something ordinary. The soft click of the door opening pulled me from my thoughts. I expected to see Marissa, the therapist I'd booked, a woman I'd met before and trusted. Instead, a man stepped in. He was tall, wearing the standard spa uniform, his expression neutral but unreadable. "Good afternoon," he said simply, setting down his oils. I hesitated for a second, blinking in confusion. "Oh," I thought. "I was scheduled with Marissa." "She had to step out unexpectedly," he replied, already preparing his tools. "I'll be taking care of you today." "I hope that's okay." Something in me wanted to ask more questions, to maybe reschedule. But then I reminded myself, this was a professional place, and I was just here to relax. So I nodded, trying to push away the small flicker of unease in my chest. The music played softly in the background as he began. At first, it was exactly what I expected, firm, measured strokes easing the knots in my shoulders. I closed my eyes, focusing on my breath. If only I'd known that this was the last moment I would feel completely at ease from the very first minute. There was something about him I couldn't quite place. His movements were controlled, steady, but there was an underlying tension, as if he was holding something back. It wasn't unprofessional, at least not yet, but it wasn't the same comforting touch I was used to. "How's the pressure?" he asked, his tone calm, almost too calm. "It's fine," I replied, my voice muffled against the headrest. But in my mind, a dozen thoughts raced. I didn't know him. I didn't know his name, his experience, or even if he'd been working here long. My logical side told me it didn't matter. This was a legitimate business, and he was here to do his job. My gut, however, whispered something different. I could hear the faint squeak of his shoes against the floor as he moved around the table, the sound of oil being poured into his hands. Every few seconds, I caught the scent of something sharper than lavender, peppermint maybe. It made the room feel colder. Halfway through my back massage, he paused. Not the usual, natural pause to adjust or reach for more oil. This was longer, as if he was studying me. I shifted slightly on the table, suddenly aware of how exposed I was, lying there with my arms by my side, my face pressed into the cushion. "Have you been coming here long?" he asked suddenly. It was such a simple question, but the way he asked it made my skin prickle. "A couple of times," I answered. "Interesting," he murmured, almost to himself. I tried to focus on the soft chimes playing in the background, but I couldn't. There was a shift in the room, subtle, but undeniable. The safe, familiar feeling had been replaced by a strange undercurrent I didn't understand. He moved to my shoulders, his fingers pressing with precision, almost too slowly. I could feel the heat from his palms through the thin fabric of the sheet, and the space between us seemed to shrink. I told myself I was overthinking it, that maybe he was just naturally quieter, more focused than the therapists I'd had before. But deep down, something about the situation didn't feel right. "Let me know if anything is uncomfortable," he said, his voice low. It was an ordinary statement, one I'd heard in every massage before. But in that moment, it felt loaded, like there was more beneath the surface. As he worked his way down my back, I could sense the rhythm changing, less methodical, more lingering. My muscles weren't relaxing anymore, they were tensing. My mind wasn't drifting, it was on high alert. I couldn't help but think, why had they switched therapists without asking me first? And more importantly, why did I suddenly feel like I needed to keep my guard up? I didn't know it then, but this was only the beginning. The hum of the soft instrumental music filled the room, but it no longer soothed me. Instead, each note seemed to heighten the awareness creeping over my skin. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, steady but heavy, like a slow drumbeat. His hands moved in deliberate patterns, shoulders, upper back, arms, but there was something different in the way he lingered. The pressure was still within the realm of normal, but the pauses between movements were longer now, almost calculated. I tried to breathe deeply, hoping to coax myself back into a state of calm. Inhale, exhale. Relax, I told myself. You're imagining this. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more I noticed. The silence between us was too long, too weighted. Then he spoke. "You carry a lot of tension here," he said, his voice low, almost intimate, his fingers pressing into the curve of my neck. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "You should really let yourself loosen up," he added. "Most people don't know how to let go." There was nothing inherently wrong with the words, but something about his tone made my stomach tighten. It wasn't advice, it felt like an invitation, though I didn't know to what. The room seemed darker now, the dim lights casting shadows that moved as he shifted around the table. I caught a whiff of the peppermint oil again, sharp and cold against the warmth of my skin. My fingers curled slightly under the sheet. I thought about saying something, anything, to break the strange tension, but I hesitated. Maybe this was just his style, maybe I was projecting my unease. Then, without warning, his touch slowed even more. The strokes down my arms became softer, almost lingering, and I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, even though my face was still pressed into the cradle. I swallowed hard. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Perfect," he replied quickly, but there was a faint smile in his tone, as if he knew something I didn't. My mind began to race. I thought of Marissa, the therapist I'd originally booked, and how different this felt. With her, the session always felt clinical, professional, safe. This felt like stepping into a conversation without knowing the rules. Each brush of his hands felt heavier now, each pause more loaded. I couldn't tell if I was overreacting or if my instincts were quietly screaming at me. But one thing was certain. Whatever had started as a simple, harmless appointment was shifting into unfamiliar territory. And somewhere deep inside, I knew the atmosphere in that room had changed for good. The first sign was so subtle, I almost convinced myself it didn't happen. His hand brushed a little lower than before, just enough for my body to stiffen. It could have been an accident. Maybe it was just the angle. I told myself to breathe, to stay calm. But then it happened again. This time, it wasn't an accident. His touch lingered a second too long in a place it had no reason to be. I felt my pulse quicken, my throat tighten. Every muscle in my body tensed, not in anticipation of relief, but in self-protection. I shifted slightly on the table, hoping my movement would signal my discomfort. But he didn't adjust. Instead, he continued as if nothing had changed, his strokes slow, deliberate, almost testing. "Are you comfortable?" he asked softly, his voice dipping into something that felt far more personal than professional. My instinct told me to get up, to end it. But my body froze, trapped between the instinct to flee and the awkward disbelief that this was actually happening. It's strange how your mind tries to rationalize even when you know the truth. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he didn't mean it like that. I thought about speaking up, but the words felt heavy, lodged somewhere deep in my chest. The dim light, the scent of peppermint, the soft music, it all felt suddenly oppressive, pressing down on me. Then came the moment I couldn't ignore. His fingers trailed down my arm, stopping just above my wrist, then slowly brushing over the back of my hand. It wasn't part of the massage technique, it was something else entirely. An unspoken message. A line crossed. I pulled my hand back instinctively, tucking it closer to my body under the sheet. He paused. For a moment, the only sound was the faint trickle of the water fountain in the corner. Then he moved back to my shoulders, as if rewinding the scene, pretending it never happened. But I knew. My mind flashed back to another time, years ago, when I'd ignored my instincts, when I'd convinced myself someone's harmless actions didn't mean anything only to regret my silence later. That memory burned in my chest now, mixing with the dread building in my stomach. I realized something important in that moment. No amount of professionalism, no reputation of a business, no polite smile from a receptionist could erase the fact that I was uncomfortable, and that mattered more than anything else. The line had been crossed. I didn't know yet how I was going to handle it. But I knew this, I couldn't just lie there and pretend nothing had happened. Because pretending, I'd learned the hard way, always comes at a cost. I could feel the heaviness in the air now, thick, almost suffocating. My breathing had changed without me realizing it, shallower and quicker. My mind was no longer here for relaxation. It was alert, searching for any sign of what might come next. He had moved back to the base of my neck, his thumbs pressing in slow, measured circles. At first, I thought he was simply refocusing, but then he leaned in closer than before. I felt the warmth of his breath on my ear before I heard his voice. "You should really let me take care of you," he whispered. 7 simple words. But they made my heart slam against my ribcage. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Low, almost secretive, as if this was something shared between us. Something private. Something that had nothing to do with the massage I'd booked. My eyes shot open against the headrest's cradle, but all I saw was the floor beneath me. I couldn't see his face, couldn't read his expression. I could only feel the proximity, the way his voice seemed to curl around my mind like smoke. I swallowed, my throat dry. "I'm fine," I said quickly, my voice tight, almost trembling. But he didn't move away. His hands slid to my shoulders again, his grip firm, as if anchoring me to the table. "You're too tense," he continued softly. "Let me help you, really help you." My chest tightened. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This wasn't about knots in my muscles or the quality of the massage. This was about power, his power over my vulnerability in this moment. Memories came rushing back, uninvited. Moments when I'd stayed quiet to avoid a scene, when I'd convinced myself that making someone else comfortable was more important than my own safety. I could feel the same fear rising now, the same freezing of my limbs. The room, once warm and calming, felt small. The air smelled too strong, the peppermint oil clinging to my skin like a reminder I couldn't scrub away. I realized that if I didn't act now, I might lose the ability to act at all. "I think I've had enough for today," I said, louder this time. My words sounded shaky to me, but they cut through the music, through the closeness, through the moment. He stilled. For a heartbeat, there was silence, no movement, no words. Then, slowly, he stepped back. "Of course," he said finally, but his tone carried something unreadable. I sat up quickly, clutching the sheet around me, my skin still prickling from his nearness. My heart was pounding, but I knew one thing: the session was over. I didn't know what he would do next, but I wasn't going to wait to find out. I kept the sheet wrapped tightly around me as I slid off the table, my bare feet meeting the cool floor. My pulse was still thundering in my ears, but I forced myself to stand tall, to act as if I wasn't rattled, even though I was. He stepped back to give me space, but there was no apology, no explanation, just that same unreadable expression. For a brief moment, I considered letting it go, just getting dressed and walking out. But I knew if I left without saying anything, the weight of this moment would follow me for a long time. "I booked this appointment for relaxation," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "What just happened wasn't okay." The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. His reaction was unexpected. He didn't get defensive. He didn't deny it. Instead, he smiled faintly, as though my statement amused him. "I was just trying to help you relax," he said lightly, his tone almost casual. "That's not your decision to make," I shot back, my grip tightening on the sheet. "When I say I'm fine, that means stop." Something flickered in his eyes then, something I couldn't quite read. Maybe irritation, maybe surprise. But he didn't push back again. I turned away, moving quickly toward my clothes. My hands trembled as I dressed, fumbling with buttons. My mind was still racing, replaying every second, every lingering touch, every word whispered too close. When I stepped toward the door, he moved aside, opening it for me. "Have a nice day," he said, as if nothing unusual had occurred. The absurdity of his normal tone made my stomach twist. I didn't respond. I just walked out. The hallway outside felt brighter, the air cooler. I could hear the receptionist speaking to another client, her cheerful tone so jarringly different from the heaviness I carried with me. For a moment, I considered telling her what had just happened, but the words wouldn't form. It felt too raw, too complicated, too exhausting to explain. Instead, I pushed open the glass door to the street. The late afternoon sun hit my face, warm and almost blinding. The sounds of traffic and distant chatter filled my ears, grounding me back in the real world. I had ended the session. I had spoken up. But it didn't feel like victory, it felt like survival. And maybe that was enough for now. As I walked toward my car, I promised myself something. I would never again question the voice in my head that whispered, "This isn't right." Because that voice wasn't fear, it was instinct. And it had just saved me from something I didn't even want to imagine. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. The steering wheel felt cold beneath my palms, grounding me, but my body was still buzzing with adrenaline. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed flushed cheeks, wide eyes, and a tightness around my mouth I didn't recognize. The street outside bustled with life, people walking their dogs, kids riding bikes, a couple laughing as they passed. None of them knew what had just happened behind that spa's closed doors. And maybe that was what struck me most, how something so small, so contained in time, could shift the way you saw the world in an instant. I replayed every moment in my head, the unexpected therapist, the pauses, the lingering touches, the whisper. I tried to pinpoint the exact second I knew something was wrong, but it was more like a slow drip, a series of tiny warnings that built into one undeniable truth. And then came the question I didn't want to face: why had I waited so long to speak up? I'd like to think I'm strong, that I know how to protect myself. But in that room, I hesitated. I froze. And it made me angry, not just at him, but at myself. Angry that I had let politeness delay my own safety. Angry that I'd felt the need to explain my discomfort instead of simply walking out. But beneath the anger was something else, relief. Relief that I had, eventually, found my voice. That I hadn't let him finish the hour as if everything was fine. That I had refused to let it slide completely into silence. The truth is, I've been here before. Different faces, different settings, but the same undercurrent, the moment when someone decides your boundaries are optional. And every time, I'd been too afraid of being rude or overreacting to do anything. Not this time. I sat there with my hands resting in my lap, breathing slowly, letting the tension drain away piece by piece. The late afternoon sun was dipping lower now, painting the buildings gold. It reminded me that the world was still turning, still moving forward, even if I felt like I'd just stepped out of a storm. I thought about telling someone right away, calling a friend, writing it down, even going back inside to report him. But I wasn't ready yet. The words felt too heavy to carry in public. I needed to hold them for a while, to make sense of them before letting them go. I put the car in gear and started driving, the city lights flickering on around me. I didn't know what would happen next, if I'd ever go back to that spa, if I'd ever see him again. But I knew one thing for certain, something in me had shifted. And I was never going to ignore that shift again. It took me a few days to speak about what happened. At first, the memory sat like a stone in my chest, heavy, unmoving. But the longer I stayed silent, the heavier it became, until I knew I had to let it out. One evening, over coffee at my friend Julia's apartment, I finally told someone. She listened quietly, her brows knitting together as I spoke. I told her about the switch in therapists, about the way he lingered, about the whisper. My voice cracked once, but I kept going, determined to get through it. When I finished, she shook her head. "You did the right thing by ending it," she said firmly. "And you're right, your instincts were telling you something for a reason." Her words were like a lifeline, pulling me out of the swirl of doubt I'd been drowning in. For days, I'd been wondering if I'd overreacted, if maybe I'd misread the situation. But deep down, I knew. We all know, in those moments, when a line has been crossed. That night, I decided I would never again silence that inner voice, not for politeness, not for fear of being wrong, not for anyone's comfort, but my own. I wrote an email to the spa, explaining exactly what happened. I didn't embellish, didn't dramatize, just laid out the facts as they occurred. I didn't care what their reaction would be. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about drawing a line in permanent ink. A week later, they responded with an apology and the promise that the therapist would no longer be working there. Whether they meant it or not, I didn't know, but the important thing was I had spoken. I had put my experience into words and refused to let it be erased. Now, when I think about that day, I don't just remember the fear or the tension. I remember the moment I decided enough was enough. That decision has followed me into other areas of my life. I've started saying no faster. I've stopped justifying my discomfort. I've realized that my boundaries are not negotiable, and they're not up for debate. The massage was supposed to be a gift to myself, a break from the noise of the world. Instead, it became a lesson. Not the kind I wanted, but maybe the kind I needed. Because here's the truth, safety isn't always about locked doors or well-lit rooms. Sometimes, it's about listening to that tiny voice inside you that says, something's wrong, and having the courage to act on it. That day in the spa will never disappear from my memory. But neither will the lesson it left behind. It taught me that boundaries aren't just walls to keep people out, they're bridges to self-respect. And I'll never let anyone cross mine without my permission again. That massage was supposed to relax me, but it taught me a lesson I'll never forget. 3.